She had dreamed of this night her entire life, the silk gown, the candlelit chapel, the vows whispered before God and society. But when the Duke of Ashford closed the door to their wedding chamber and turned to face her with eyes hollow as winter graves, Lady Evangeline Hartley realized her marriage was not a beginning. It was a curse, and she had just become its keeper. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Hartley Manor with the kind of pale, hesitant glow that seemed to apologize for existing. Lady Evangeline Hartley sat at her vanity, watching her lady's maid Beatrice weave pearls into her dark auburn hair. The reflection staring back at her was composed, serene, a portrait of aristocratic perfection. But beneath the surface, her heart beat with the frantic rhythm of a bird trapped in a gilded cage. "You look radiant, my lady," Beatrice murmured, her fingers deft and practiced. "The Duke will be utterly captivated." Evangeline offered a small smile, the kind she had perfected over 22 years of being groomed for this very moment. "Thank you, Beatrice." But captivation was not what she sought. She wanted something far more elusive, far more dangerous. She wanted love. The Hartley family had been pillars of English society for generations, their wealth rooted in vast estates across the countryside and shrewd investments in the burgeoning railway industry. Evangeline's father, the Earl of Hartley, was a man of rigid principles and even more rigid expectations. From the moment she could understand language, she had been taught that her purpose was singular: to marry well, to elevate the family's standing, and to produce heirs who would carry the Hartley name into the next century. And so, when the Duke of Ashford, one of the most powerful and enigmatic figures in all of England, had expressed interest in her during the London season, her fate had been sealed with the efficiency of a business transaction. Evangeline rose from the vanity and moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens below. The estate was breathtaking, a testament to centuries of wealth and privilege, but it had always felt more like a museum than a home, beautiful, untouchable, and utterly lifeless. "Miss Evangeline?" Beatrice's voice pulled her from her reverie. "Your mother is waiting for you in the drawing room." With a steadying breath, Evangeline descended the grand staircase, her silk morning gown whispering against the marble steps. The Countess of Hartley sat in the drawing room, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. She was a woman who had mastered the art of concealing emotion beneath layers of propriety. "Sit, Evangeline," her mother said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Evangeline obeyed, folding her hands in her lap with practiced grace. "In 3 days you will become the Duchess of Ashford," her mother began, her tone measured and deliberate. "This is the culmination of everything we have worked toward. The Duke is a man of immense power and influence. His lineage is impeccable, his estates vast. You will want for nothing." "Yes, mother," Evangeline replied softly. The Countess leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "But you must understand, Evangeline, that marriage is not about personal happiness. It is about duty, about securing the future of our family. The Duke has chosen you, and you will honor that choice with obedience and dignity." Evangeline's fingers tightened in her lap, but her expression remained serene. "Of course, mother." "Good." The Countess sat back, satisfied. "Now there are matters to discuss regarding the wedding breakfast and the guest list. Your father has invited several members of Parliament, and the Duke's family will be arriving tomorrow." "Whoa." As her mother droned on about seating arrangements and floral displays, Evangeline's mind drifted. She had met the Duke of Ashford only a handful of times, always under the watchful eyes of chaperones and family members. He was a man of striking appearance, tall, with dark hair and piercing grey eyes that seemed to see through the carefully constructed facades of polite society. But there was something about him that unsettled her, a coldness that lingered beneath his impeccable manners. Still, she had allowed herself to hope. Perhaps in time affection would grow between them. Perhaps he would see her not as a means to an end, but as a partner, a companion. That evening the Duke arrived for dinner, accompanied by his younger brother, Lord Julian Ashford. The dining room at Hartley Manor was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the long mahogany table, and servants moved with silent efficiency, serving course after course of exquisite cuisine. The Duke sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding even in silence. He was dressed impeccably in a dark evening coat, his cravat tied with precision. Evangeline sat to his right, acutely aware of the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. "Lady Evangeline," the Duke said, his voice smooth and measured, "I trust the preparations for the wedding are proceeding smoothly." "Yes, Your Grace," she replied, meeting his gaze. "Everything is in order." "Excellent." He took a sip of wine, his expression unreadable. "I have no doubt you will fulfill your role admirably." There it was again, that word, role, as if she were an actress in a play, reciting lines written by someone else. Lord Julian, seated across from her, offered a warm smile. He was younger than the Duke by several years, with a more open, affable demeanour. "My brother is fortunate to have secured such a lovely bride," he said, his tone genuine. "I have no doubt you will bring much joy to Ashford Hall." Evangeline returned his smile, grateful for the kindness. "You are too generous, Lord Julian." The Duke's gaze flickered to his brother, a brief, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. "Julian has always been prone to sentimentality," he said, his tone edged with something Evangeline couldn't quite name. "But sentiment has little place in matters of consequence." The table fell silent, the tension palpable. Evangeline's father cleared his throat, steering the conversation towards safer topics: politics, the state of the economy, the latest developments in the railway expansion. But Evangeline barely heard any of it. Her attention was fixed on the Duke, on the way his fingers drummed lightly against the stem of his wineglass, on the distant, almost haunted look in his eyes. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Evangeline stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. In 3 days, she would stand before God and society and pledge her life to a man she barely knew, a man who seemed more interested in her pedigree than her person. But what choice did she have? To refuse would be to disgrace her family, to shatter the carefully constructed future her parents had built for her. And so she would go through with it. She would become the Duchess of Ashford, and she would play her role to perfection, even if it meant sacrificing the one thing she had always longed for, a love that was real, that was hers. But as the days counted down to her wedding, Evangeline couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. And on the night she would finally become the Duke's wife, she would discover a truth so dark, so impossible, that it would shatter everything she thought she knew, and force her to make a choice that would determine not just her fate, but his as well. The morning of the wedding dawned with a crispness that seemed to mock the solemnity of the occasion. Evangeline woke before the sun had fully risen, her body tense with a mixture of anticipation and dread that she couldn't quite name. The household had been in a state of controlled chaos for days, but now, as the final hours approached, an eerie calm settled over Hartley Manor. Beatrice entered her chamber with a tray of tea and toast, though Evangeline's stomach was too knotted to consider eating. "The bath is being drawn, my lady," Beatrice said softly, her eyes bright with excitement. "And your gown has arrived from the modiste. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Evangeline nodded, allowing herself to be led through the rituals of preparation. The bath was scented with rose oil, the water hot enough to turn her pale skin pink. As she soaked, she tried to quiet the voice in her head that whispered warnings she couldn't quite articulate. The wedding gown was indeed magnificent, layers of ivory silk and Brussels lace, with seed pearls sewn into intricate patterns across the bodice. The sleeves were fitted, the neckline modest yet elegant, and the train extended several feet behind her. When Beatrice and two other maids finally fastened the last button and arranged the veil over her carefully styled hair, Evangeline barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like a bride from a fairy tale. But fairy tales, she had learned, were often far darker than they appeared. Her mother entered the room, resplendent in deep burgundy silk, her expression one of satisfied approval. "Perfect," the Countess declared, circling Evangeline with a critical eye. "You are a credit to the Hartley name. The Duke will be pleased." "Thank you, Mother," Evangeline whispered, though the words felt hollow. The Countess stepped closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, though intimacy was not something that came naturally to her. "Tonight, you will become a wife in every sense of the word. You understand what is expected of you?" Evangeline felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she nodded. "Yes, Mother." "Good. Remember, a wife's duty is to her husband in all things. You will submit with grace and dignity, and in time you will provide him with heirs. That is your purpose now." The words settled over Evangeline like a shroud, but she maintained her composure. "I understand." The Countess studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Come, your father is waiting." The journey to St. Michael's Church was a blur of cobblestone streets and curious onlookers. The church itself was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, its spire reaching toward the grey English sky. Inside, the pews were filled with the cream of society, lords and ladies, members of Parliament, influential merchants, and distant relatives. Evangeline had met only once or twice in her life. As she stood in the vestibule, her arm linked through her father's, Evangeline could hear the murmur of voices, the rustle of expensive fabrics, the occasional cough echoing through the cavernous space. The organ began to play, the deep, resonant notes filling the air with a gravity that made her heart pound. "Head high, Evangeline," her father murmured, his grip on her arm firm. "This is your moment." The doors opened, and every head turned to watch as she began the long walk down the aisle. The faces blurred together, some smiling, some curious, some envious, but Evangeline's gaze was fixed on the figure standing at the altar. The Duke of Ashford stood perfectly still, his dark coat immaculate, his expression unreadable. Lord Julian stood beside him as his groomsman, offering Evangeline an encouraging smile as she approached. But the Duke's eyes, those piercing grey eyes, remained distant, as if he were looking through her rather than at her. When she finally reached the altar, her father placed her hand in the Duke's. His fingers were cold, his grip perfunctory. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice droning through the familiar words of the marriage rite. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Evangeline's mind drifted as the vicar spoke of love, honor, and fidelity. She tried to focus on the Duke's face, searching for some sign of emotion, some hint of the man beneath the aristocratic mask. But there was nothing, only that same cold, distant expression. The vows were exchanged with mechanical precision. The Duke's voice was steady, his words clear and deliberate. Evangeline's own voice trembled slightly, but she managed to speak the words that would bind her to him for the rest of her life. "I, Evangeline Charlotte Hartley, take thee, Sterling Maximilian Ashford, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and to obey, till death us do part." The ring, a heavy gold band set with diamonds, was slipped onto her finger. It felt like a shackle. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar declared. "You may kiss the bride." The Duke leaned forward, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss so brief, so devoid of warmth, that it might as well have been a handshake. The congregation erupted in polite applause, and Evangeline forced herself to smile as she turned to face the sea of faces. They processed back down the aisle together, the Duke's hand resting lightly on hers. Outside, the church bells rang, and a crowd of well-wishers had gathered to catch a glimpse of the new Duchess of Ashford. Evangeline waved mechanically, her smile fixed in place, even as a growing sense of unease coiled in her stomach. The wedding breakfast was held at Ashford House, the Duke's London residence, a magnificent Georgian mansion in Mayfair. The ballroom had been transformed into a vision of elegance, with white roses and ivy cascading from every surface, crystal chandeliers glittering overhead, and tables laden with delicacies from across the empire. Evangeline sat at the head table beside her new husband, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes watching their every move. The Duke was the picture of aristocratic grace, engaging in polite conversation with the guests seated nearby, but he barely spoke to her. When he did, it was only to inquire if she needed anything, or to make some perfunctory comment about the proceedings. Lord Julian, seated on her other side, was far more attentive. "You must be exhausted," he said kindly. "These affairs are always such spectacles." "I confess I will be glad when it's over," Evangeline admitted, grateful for his warmth. "My brother can be reserved," Julian said carefully, lowering his voice. "But I'm certain that in time you'll find him to be a good husband." Evangeline wanted to believe him, but the doubt gnawing at her heart refused to be silenced. As the meal progressed, toasts were made. Her father spoke of duty and legacy, the Duke's uncle praised the union of two great families, and Lord Julian offered a heartfelt wish for their happiness. Through it all, the Duke remained impassive, raising his glass at the appropriate moments, but offering no words of his own. It was during the dancing that everything began to unravel. The Duke led Evangeline onto the floor for the first waltz, his hand resting formally at her waist, his movements precise and practiced. They moved together in silence, the music swelling around them, the guests watching with approving smiles. "You dance well, Your Grace," Evangeline ventured, hoping to break the oppressive silence between them. "As do you," he replied, his tone flat. "I hope that we might. That is, I hope we can come to know one another better," she continued, her voice soft. "I know this marriage was arranged, but I believe that affection can grow between us, given time." For the first time, something flickered in the Duke's eyes, but it wasn't warmth. It was something darker, something almost like pain. "You are naive, Lady Evangeline," he said quietly. "Affection is a luxury neither of us can afford." Before she could respond, the music ended, and the Duke released her with a curt bow. "Excuse me," he said. "There are matters I must attend to." And then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the ballroom. Evangeline felt the heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks as whispers began to ripple through the crowd. She forced herself to smile, to move gracefully toward the edge of the dance floor, but the damage was done. The Duke had abandoned his own bride at their wedding breakfast. Lord Julian appeared at her side almost immediately, his expression concerned. "Forgive my brother," he said quietly. "He has much on his mind." "Of course," Evangeline murmured, though her heart was pounding with a mixture of shame and anger. But the worst was yet to come. An hour later, as the guests mingled and the champagne flowed freely, Evangeline found herself near the terrace doors, seeking a moment of respite from the suffocating attention. That was when she heard voices, low, urgent, coming from just beyond the doors. "You cannot do this, Sterling, not tonight, not to her." It was Lord Julian's voice, tight with frustration. "I have no choice." The Duke's voice was cold, final. "The arrangement was made long before she entered the picture. I will fulfill my obligations to her in due time, but tonight I must go." "Go where?" "To her?" Julian's voice was incredulous. "You've just married Evangeline. She deserves better than this. What she deserves is irrelevant. This is the way it must be." Evangeline's blood turned to ice. Her. There was another woman. She pushed through the terrace doors, her gown rustling, her heart hammering in her chest. The two brothers stood in the shadows, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Both turned to look at her, Julian's expression stricken, the Duke's unreadable. "Your Grace," Evangeline said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to control it. "What is the meaning of this?" The Duke's jaw tightened. "This does not concern you." "Does not concern me?" Her voice rose, months of suppressed emotion finally breaking through the carefully constructed facade. "I am your wife. We were married not 4 hours ago, and already you speak of obligations to another woman." A hush fell over the nearby guests who had wandered close enough to hear. Faces turned toward the terrace, eyes wide with shock and barely concealed delight at the unfolding scandal. "Evangeline, please," Julian began, but she held up a hand to silence him. "I deserve an explanation," she said, her eyes fixed on the Duke. "If there is another woman, if this marriage is a sham, then tell me now. Tell all of them." She gestured to the growing crowd of onlookers. The Duke's expression hardened, and for a moment Evangeline thought he might actually tell her the truth, but instead he stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You will compose yourself, madam. You are making a scene." "A scene?" Evangeline felt something inside her crack. "You have humiliated me in front of all of society, and you accuse me of making a scene." The whispers grew louder, the guests pressing closer, hungry for every word of the unfolding drama. "Sterling, for God's sake," Julian hissed. "Tell her something, anything." But the Duke simply turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the house without another word. Evangeline stood frozen, her chest heaving, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. The faces surrounding her were a blur of shock, pity, and cruel amusement. She had become the spectacle of the season, the abandoned bride, the humiliated duchess. Her mother appeared at her side, her face pale with fury. "Inside, now!" she commanded, gripping Evangeline's arm with bruising force. As she was led away from the terrace, away from the prying eyes and whispered gossip, Evangeline felt the full weight of her situation crash down upon her. She had been sold into a marriage with a man who clearly wanted nothing to do with her, a man who had another woman waiting somewhere in the shadows. And the worst part was, she had no escape. She was bound to him now, for better or for worse, till death did them part. But what Evangeline didn't know, what no one in that glittering ballroom could possibly imagine, was that the Duke's secret had nothing to do with another woman. It was something far more dangerous, far more impossible. And when she finally learned the truth on their wedding night, she would realize that her humiliation was the least of her concerns. Because the man she had married was not entirely a man at all, and she had just become the only person in the world who could save him from a fate worse than death. The carriage ride to Ashford Hall was the longest journey of Evangeline's life, though it lasted only 3 hours. She sat in rigid silence, her wedding gown now feeling like a costume from a play that had ended in disaster. The Duke sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside, his expression as impenetrable as stone. Neither spoke a word. When they finally arrived at the estate, Evangeline's breath caught despite her misery. Ashford Hall was magnificent, a sprawling Palladian mansion set against rolling hills, with formal gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. But its beauty felt cold, unwelcoming, like a mausoleum dressed in marble and ivy. The servants lined up to greet their new mistress, their faces carefully neutral. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, curtsied deeply. "Welcome to Ashford Hall, Your Grace." The title felt foreign, wrong. Evangeline nodded, managing a weak smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your chambers," the Duke said, his first words since they'd left London. "I have business to attend to." And just like that, he disappeared into the depths of the house, leaving Evangeline standing in the grand entrance hall, abandoned once again. Mrs. Pemberton led her up a sweeping staircase to the Duchess's apartments, a suite of rooms decorated in pale blues and creams, elegant but impersonal. "Your trunks will be brought up shortly, Your Grace." The housekeeper said. "Dinner will be served at 8. Shall I send a maid to help you dress?" "Yes, thank you," Evangeline whispered, her voice barely audible. When the door finally closed and she was alone, Evangeline sank onto the edge of the bed and allowed the tears she'd been holding back all day to finally fall. Great, heaving sobs racked her body as the full horror of her situation became real. She was trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who clearly despised her, in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. But it was the wedding night that filled her with the most dread. Hours passed. Evangeline bathed and changed into a nightgown of white silk and lace, chosen by her mother for this very occasion. She sat at the vanity, brushing her hair with mechanical strokes, watching the clock tick closer to midnight. Her hands trembled. At 11:30, there was a knock at the door connecting her chamber to the Duke's. Evangeline's heart leapt into her throat. "Come in," she managed to say. The Duke entered, still fully dressed in his evening clothes. His face was drawn, his eyes haunted in a way she hadn't seen before. He closed the door behind him and stood there, as if gathering courage. "We need to talk," he said finally. Evangeline rose from the vanity, wrapping her dressing gown more tightly around herself. "Yes, I believe we do." The Duke moved to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. For a long moment he said nothing, and Evangeline wondered if he would simply leave again without explanation. "There is no other woman," he said finally, his voice low. "What you overheard, it was not what you thought." "Then what was it?" Evangeline demanded, finding her voice. "What could possibly justify the way you've treated me?" He turned to face her then, and she was startled by the raw anguish in his eyes. "I am cursed, Evangeline, truly, literally cursed. And by marrying you, I may have condemned you to a fate worse than the humiliation you suffered today." Evangeline stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Cursed? What are you talking about?" And then he told her. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush, as if a dam had finally broken. He spoke of his family's dark history, of an ancestor who had wronged a Romani woman 2 centuries ago, of the curse she had placed upon the Ashford line. Every firstborn son, upon reaching his 30th year, would begin to transform, not into a beast, not into a monster of legend, but into something far more insidious. He would slowly lose his humanity, his capacity for emotion, for connection, until he became little more than a living statue, capable of movement and speech, but devoid of all feeling, all warmth, all life. "I turn 30 in 6 months, the Duke said, his voice hollow. "The transformation has already begun. I can feel it, Evangeline. Every day I feel a little less. Joy, sorrow, anger, they're all fading like colors draining from a painting. Soon there will be nothing left but the shell of a man." Evangeline sank back onto the bed, her mind reeling. "This is madness. Curses aren't real. They're superstition, folklore." "I wish that were true," he interrupted. "My father suffered the same fate. I watched him deteriorate over the course of 5 years, until he was nothing but a hollow echo of the man he'd been. He died when I was 15, and I swore I would find a way to break the curse before it claimed me too." "And have you?" Evangeline asked, though she already knew the answer. "No." The single word was heavy with despair. "I've consulted scholars, mystics, anyone who might have knowledge of such things. There is only one way to break the curse, and it requires something I cannot give." "What?" The Duke met her gaze, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in his eyes. True love, not the arranged affection of a society marriage, but real, selfless, transformative love. "The curse can only be broken if someone loves me enough to willingly share the burden, to take half the curse upon themselves." Evangeline's blood ran cold. "You married me, hoping I would—" "What? Fall in love with you and sacrifice myself?" "No!" The vehemence in his voice startled her. "I married you because I had no choice. My family demanded an heir, society expected it, and I thought perhaps if I fulfilled my duty, If I gave them what they wanted, I might buy myself more time to find another solution. But I never intended to ask this of you. I never intended to involve you in this nightmare at all. Then why tell me now? Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I saw the hurt in your eyes today, and I realized that my silence was causing you a different kind of suffering. He moved closer, his expression earnest. I will not touch you, Evangeline. I will not consummate this marriage. You will remain free in every way that matters, and when I am gone, when the curse has taken everything, you will be a wealthy widow, free to live your life as you choose. Evangeline stood, anger finally cutting through her shock. You arrogant, selfish man. You think you're being noble. You've trapped me in a marriage that will be scrutinized by all of society, denied me the possibility of children, of a real partnership, and you expect me to be grateful. I expect nothing, the Duke said quietly. I am simply telling you the truth. Get out, Evangeline said, her voice shaking. Get out of my room. Now. The Duke bowed stiffly and left without another word. Evangeline collapsed onto the bed, her mind spinning. Curses, transformations, impossible choices. It was all too much, too absurd, and yet the look in the Duke's eyes had been real. His fear had been real. She didn't sleep that night. As dawn broke over Ashford Hall, Evangeline made a decision. She would not remain here, trapped in this nightmare. She would leave, seek refuge somewhere she could think clearly, away from the Duke and his impossible story. By mid-morning, she had penned a letter to her Aunt Agatha, her father's sister, who lived in Bath. Agatha was a widow, independent and unconventional by society's standards, and she had always been kind to Evangeline. If anyone would offer sanctuary without judgment, it would be her. 3 days later, Evangeline arrived in Bath, her trunks following behind. Aunt Agatha's townhouse was elegant but comfortable, filled with books and curiosities from her travels. The older woman embraced Evangeline warmly, asking no questions, simply offering tea and a sympathetic ear. "My dear girl," Agatha said, studying Evangeline's pale face, "whatever has happened, you are safe here. Stay as long as you need." Over the following weeks, Evangeline slowly began to breathe again. Bath was a revelation, a city of culture and intellect, where the assembly rooms hosted lectures and concerts, where the pump room buzzed with conversation about literature, science, and philosophy. Aunt Agatha introduced her to a circle of friends, unlike anyone Evangeline had known in London. Artists, writers, reformers, women who spoke their minds and lived on their own terms. One afternoon, Agatha took her to a lecture at the Literary and Scientific Institution. The speaker was a physician named Dr. Elias Reid, recently returned from studying in Edinburgh. He was perhaps 35, with warm brown eyes, dark hair touched with grey at the temples, and an earnest manner that immediately put Evangeline at ease. Dr. Reid spoke about advances in medicine, about the importance of empirical observation over superstition, about the human body's remarkable capacity for healing. Evangeline found herself leaning forward, captivated not just by his words, but by the passion with which he spoke. After the lecture, Agatha introduced them. "Dr. Reid, may I present my niece, the Duchess of Ashford?" Dr. Reid bowed, but his smile was warm and genuine. "A pleasure, Your Grace. I hope you found the lecture interesting." "Very much so," Evangeline said. "Your work sounds fascinating." "It's humbling, really," he replied. "The more I learn, the more I realize how much we don't yet understand about the human condition. But that's what makes it worthwhile. The pursuit of knowledge, the hope of alleviating suffering." Over the following weeks, Evangeline found herself in Dr. Reid's company more and more often. Agatha, with her characteristic perceptiveness, seemed to engineer opportunities for them to meet, at dinners, at the theatre, at afternoon walks through the Royal Crescent. Dr. Reid was easy to talk to, treating Evangeline not as a duchess or a decorative object, but as an intelligent person whose opinions mattered. One afternoon, as they walked through Victoria Park, Dr. Reed asked the question Evangeline had been dreading. "Forgive my impertinence, your grace, but I cannot help but wonder, why are you in Bath? Shouldn't you be at Ashford Hall with your husband?" Evangeline's steps faltered. She had prepared a dozen polite lies, but looking into Dr. Reed's kind, honest face, she found she couldn't voice any of them. "My marriage is complicated," she said finally. "I see." Dr. Reed was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to explain. I only ask because I've come to value your company greatly, and I would hate to think you were unhappy." "I am less unhappy here than I was there," Evangeline admitted. "That will have to suffice for now." Dr. Reed nodded, and they walked on in companionable silence. But that evening, as Evangeline sat in Agatha's drawing room, her aunt fixed her with a penetrating look. "You're falling for him, aren't you?" "Dr. Reed." Evangeline's cheeks flushed. I don't know. Perhaps. Is that terribly wrong of me?" "Wrong? No, my dear. Human. Absolutely." Agatha set down her teacup. "But you are married, Evangeline, and while I have no love for the constraints society places on women, I also know that scandal can destroy a life. You must be careful." "I know," Evangeline whispered. "But Aunt Agatha, what if my marriage is not what it seems? What if there are circumstances that make it impossible?" Agatha leaned forward, her expression serious. "Then you must decide what you want, Evangeline. Not what your parents want, not what society expects, but what you truly want for your life. And then you must have the courage to pursue it, consequences be damned." That night, Evangeline lay awake, her mind churning. She thought of the Duke alone in his vast estate, slowly losing himself to an impossible curse. She thought of Dr. Reed, with his kindness and his passion for healing. She thought of the life she had imagined for herself, and the reality she now faced. And for the first time since her disastrous wedding, she felt a spark of something she had thought lost forever. Hope. Not for the life she had been promised, but for a life she might choose for herself. But as spring turned to summer and Evangeline's heart began to heal in the gentle warmth of Bath society, a letter would arrive that would shatter her fragile peace. The Duke was dying, the curse accelerating far faster than anyone had anticipated, and despite everything, despite the humiliation, the abandonment, the impossible situation, Evangeline would find herself faced with a choice that would define not just her future, but the very person she would become. Could she walk away and let him fade into nothingness? Or would she return to Ashford Hall and risk everything to save a man who had given her every reason to hate him? The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late June, delivered by a rider who had clearly travelled through the night. Evangeline was in the garden with Aunt Agatha, discussing plans to attend a charity concert that evening, when the butler brought the sealed envelope on a silver tray. The Ashford crest was unmistakable, a rampant lion beneath a crown, pressed into black wax. Evangeline's hands trembled as she broke the seal. "Your Grace, I write to you with the gravest urgency. His Grace the Duke has taken a severe turn. The physicians can offer no explanation, but those of us who know the truth understand what is happening. The curse is progressing far more rapidly than anticipated. He has perhaps weeks, not months. I do not presume to tell you your duty, but I believe you should know. Whatever grievances exist between you, he is still your husband, and he is dying." Your servant, Lord Julian Ashford. Evangeline read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her consciousness. Aunt Agatha, watching her niece's face drain of colour, gently took the letter from her hands and read it herself. "My God!" Agatha whispered. "Evangeline, what is this about a curse?" And so, for the first time, Evangeline told someone the whole truth. She spoke of the Duke's confession on their wedding night, of the impossible curse that was stealing his humanity piece by piece, of the only cure that required a sacrifice she had never agreed to make. Agatha listened in silence, her expression growing more troubled with each revelation. When Evangeline finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe him?" Agatha asked finally. About the curse? I don't know, Evangeline admitted. It sounds like madness. But the fear in his eyes was real, Aunt Agatha. And now Julian writes that he's dying. Then you must decide, my dear. Will you go to him? Evangeline stood, pacing the garden path. How can I? He humiliated me, trapped me in a marriage built on lies. Why should I sacrifice anything for him? Perhaps you shouldn't, Agatha said gently. But I think the question you're really asking is not whether you should, but whether you can live with yourself if you don't. That is a question only you can answer. Evangeline thought of the Duke's hollow eyes, of the desperation beneath his cold exterior. She thought of the man slowly disappearing into nothingness, alone in his vast estate. And despite everything, despite all the hurt and anger, she felt something stir in her chest. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of compassion. If I go, Evangeline said slowly, I go on my own terms, not as a dutiful wife, but as someone seeking the truth. I need to see him, to understand what's really happening, and then I'll decide. Agatha smiled, pride shining in her eyes. Then go, my dear. But remember, you owe him nothing. Whatever choice you make it for yourself. 2 days later, Evangeline's carriage rolled up the drive to Ashford Hall. The estate looked different in the summer light, less forbidding, though no less grand. Lord Julian was waiting at the entrance, his face haggard with worry. Your Grace, he said, bowing deeply. Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would. Neither was I, Evangeline admitted. How is he? Julian's expression darkened. See for yourself. He led her through the house to the Duke's private study. The man sitting behind the massive oak desk was barely recognizable. In the 3 months since Evangeline had left, the Duke had aged a decade. His face was gaunt, his skin pale as parchment, and his eyes, those piercing grey eyes, were dull, lifeless, like windows into an empty room. Evangeline, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. You came. Julian wrote to me, she replied, keeping her distance. He said you were dying. I am. The Duke stated it as simple fact without fear or regret. The curse is taking me faster than it took my father. Perhaps because I've fought it harder. Perhaps because I deserve it more. Don't say that, Evangeline said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. The Duke looked at her then, really looked at her, and for just a moment something flickered in those dead eyes. You look well. Bath agrees with you. I've been finding myself, Evangeline said carefully, learning who I am beyond the role I was raised to play. Good. The word was barely a whisper. You deserve that freedom. Julian cleared his throat. Sterling, tell her. Tell her what you've learned. The Duke's jaw tightened. One of the few expressions he still seemed capable of making. I've been researching the curse, consulting with scholars who specialize in Romani folklore. There may be another way to break it, one that doesn't require the sacrifice I mentioned before. Evangeline's heart leapt. What way? The curse feeds on isolation, on the severing of human connection. It was designed to punish my ancestor for his cruelty, for his inability to see the humanity in others. The original cure, true love and willing sacrifice, was meant to be nearly impossible for men like him to achieve. The Duke paused, struggling to find words. But there's a loophole of sorts. If I can reconnect with my humanity, if I can feel again, truly feel, before the transformation completes, the curse might be weakened enough to break. And how do you propose to do that? Evangeline asked. I don't know, the Duke admitted, and for the first time she heard genuine despair in his voice. I've tried everything, music, art, memories of happier times. Nothing penetrates the numbness. It's like being encased in ice, watching the world through a thick pane of glass. Evangeline moved closer, studying his face. When did you last feel anything? Anything at all? The Duke was silent for a long moment. When you walked into this room just now, for a fraction of a second I felt something, relief perhaps, or hope, but it was gone before I could grasp it. An idea began to form in Evangeline's mind, audacious and terrifying. Then perhaps what you need is not solitude, but engagement, not isolation, but connection. What are you suggesting? Julian asked. Evangeline took a deep breath. I'm suggesting that we return to society, together. That we face the scandal, the gossip, the judgment, and in doing so, force you to feel something, even if it's only embarrassment or anger. The Duke stared at her as if she'd suggested they fly to the moon. That's madness. The humiliation would be... Would be what? Evangeline interrupted. Worse than dying, worse than fading into nothingness? She stepped closer, her voice fierce. You humiliated me at our wedding, Sterling. You left me standing alone while society whispered and judged. Perhaps it's time you experience that same vulnerability. She's right, Julian said quietly. You've been hiding here, avoiding everyone. Maybe that's exactly what the curse wants. The Duke looked between them, and Evangeline could see him struggling to process the suggestion. Finally, he nodded. Very well. What did you have in mind? There's a summer ball at Thornfield Manor next week, Evangeline said, thinking quickly. Lord and Lady Thornfield are influential, and their events are always well attended. We'll go together, as husband and wife, and we'll face whatever comes. And what do you get out of this? The Duke asked, his analytical mind still functioning, even as his emotions failed. Why would you help me after everything I've done? Evangeline met his gaze steadily. Because despite everything, I don't want to be the woman who let her husband die when she might have saved him. And because I've learned something these past months, I'm stronger than I thought. Strong enough to face society's judgment. Strong enough to make my own choices. Then we have an accord, the Duke said, extending his hand. Evangeline took it, feeling the coldness of his skin, the weakness of his grip. We do. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation. Evangeline took charge with an authority that surprised even herself, ordering new gowns, arranging for the Duke's valet to ensure he was properly attired, and sending word to key members of society that the Duke and Duchess of Ashford would be attending the Thornfield Ball. The gossip began immediately. Evangeline could almost hear the whispers spreading through London's drawing rooms. The abandoned bride was returning with her mysterious husband. What could it mean? Had they reconciled? Was there scandal brewing? Let them wonder, Evangeline thought. She had spent too long caring what society thought. The night of the ball arrived with oppressive summer heat. Evangeline dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair. Her maid arranged her hair in an elegant, upswept style, with a few curls framing her face. She looked, she had to admit, magnificent, not like a victim, but like a woman who knew her own worth. The Duke was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in formal black evening wear. He looked better than he had a week ago. Julian had ensured he ate properly and got some sun, but the emptiness in his eyes remained. You look beautiful, he said. The words automatic, rehearsed. Thank you, Evangeline replied. Are you ready for this? No, he admitted. But I suspect that's rather the point. The carriage ride to Thornfield Manor was tense. Julian accompanied them, providing a buffer of nervous conversation. As they approached the grand estate, ablaze with lights, Evangeline felt her own anxiety rising. This was it, the moment she would face everyone who had witnessed her humiliation. But she was not the same woman who had fled London 3 months ago. That woman had been afraid, uncertain, defined by others' expectations. The woman who stepped out of the carriage and took the Duke's arm was someone new, someone who had discovered her own strength. The ballroom fell silent as they were announced. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. Evangeline felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, heard the sharp intake of collective breath. Beside her the Duke stood rigid, his face a mask. Smile, Evangeline whispered. Let them see we're united. The Duke's lips curved in what might charitably be called a smile, and they descended the stairs together. Lady Thornfield, ever the gracious hostess, swept forward to greet them. Your Graces, what a delightful surprise. We are so pleased you could join us. The pleasure is ours, Lady Thornfield, Evangeline replied smoothly. Your home is lovely." As they moved into the ballroom, the whispers began in earnest. Evangeline caught fragments of conversation, thought they'd separated. "Oh, looks different, doesn't she? Wonder what happened." And then she saw them, standing near the refreshment table looking like a portrait of smug satisfaction. The Duke's cousin, Lord Percival Ashford, and his wife, the former Miss Charlotte Waverley. Charlotte had been one of Evangeline's acquaintances during the London season, always quick with a cutting remark disguised as concern. Percival was next in line for the dukedom if Sterling died without an heir. The realization hit Evangeline like a physical blow. Percival had everything to gain from Sterling's deterioration. "Sterling, darling," Percival called out, his voice carrying across the room. "How wonderful to see you out and about. We'd heard you were unwell." The Duke's hand tightened on Evangeline's arm. "I'm quite well, Percival. Thank you for your concern." Charlotte glided forward, her silk gown shimmering in the candlelight. "And Evangeline, my dear, you look positively radiant. Bath must have agreed with you. Such a shame you had to leave your new husband so soon after the wedding." Her smile was poisonous. "But I suppose some marriages require adjustments." Evangeline felt anger flare in her chest, not for herself but for the Duke, who stood beside her struggling to feel anything at all. "Indeed, Charlotte, I've learned that true partnership requires understanding and patience, qualities that some people never develop, no matter how long they're married." And the barb hit home. Charlotte's smile faltered, and Evangeline knew she'd struck a nerve. It was common knowledge that Charlotte's marriage to Percival was one of convenience, not affection. "Shall we dance, my dear?" the Duke asked, his voice still flat, but his timing perfect. "I'd be delighted," Evangeline replied. As they moved onto the dance floor, Evangeline could feel the Duke's stiffness, his mechanical movements. "Talk to me," she said quietly, as they began to waltz. "Tell me what you're feeling, even if it's nothing. Describe the nothing." "It's like drowning in silence," the Duke said slowly. "I can see you, see everyone watching us, and I know I should feel embarrassed or angry or something, but there's just emptiness." "Then let's fill it," Evangeline said. "Look at Percival. Really look at him. He's hoping you'll fail, hoping you'll die so he can inherit everything. Doesn't that make you angry?" The Duke's eyes found his cousin across the room. Percival was watching them with barely concealed anticipation. "I suppose it should," Sterling said, "but I can't seem to—" "Try harder," Evangeline urged. "He's a vulture, Sterling. He's been circling, waiting for you to fall. And Charlotte, she's been spreading rumors about me, about us, delighting in our misery. Don't they deserve your anger?" Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, brief, faint, but there. "Yes," he said, and his voice had the slightest edge to it. "Yes, they do." "Do? Good," Evangeline said, feeling a surge of hope. "Hold on to that. Feel it." The music swelled, and they moved together with increasing fluidity. Around them, other couples joined the dance, but Evangeline was aware only of the man in her arms, of the desperate battle he was fighting against the curse, trying to consume him. When the dance ended, they were approached by Lord Julian, who had been watching from the sidelines. "You're doing wonderfully," he said quietly. "Both of you." But the evening was far from over. As they moved through the ballroom, accepting congratulations and deflecting intrusive questions, Evangeline became aware of another presence. Dr. Elias Reed had arrived, accompanied by a prominent Bath family. Their eyes met across the room, and Evangeline felt her heart skip. She hadn't expected to see him here, hadn't prepared herself for the complicated emotions his presence evoked. Dr. Reed made his way toward them, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace," he said, bowing to Evangeline, "what a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you'd returned to society." "Dr. Reed," Evangeline replied, acutely aware of the Duke's attention shifting to the newcomer. "May I present my husband, the Duke of Ashford? Sterling, this is Dr. Elias Reed, a physician I met in Bath." The two men sized each other up, and Evangeline saw something remarkable, a flash of emotion in the Duke's eyes. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Jealousy? Possessiveness? A physician, the Duke said, his voice slightly less flat than before. How did you come to meet my wife, Dr. Reed? Through her aunt, Lady Agatha, Dr. Reed replied smoothly. We attended several lectures together. Your wife has a remarkable intellect, Your Grace. She asked some of the most insightful questions I've heard in years. Did she? The Duke's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Evangeline's waist. I'm sure she did. The tension between the two men was palpable, and Evangeline realized with a start that this spark of possessive feeling might be exactly what the Duke needed. Dr. Reed was kind enough to escort me to several cultural events while I was in Bath, Evangeline said, her voice deliberately casual. He's quite knowledgeable about a wide range of subjects. How fortunate for you, the Duke said, and there was definitely an edge to his voice now. Dr. Reed, sensing the undercurrent, bowed gracefully. I should return to my party. Your Grace, it was a pleasure. He met Evangeline's eyes one last time, a question in his gaze, before disappearing into the crowd. You spent time with him, the Duke said, and it wasn't a question. In Bath. I did, Evangeline confirmed. He was a friend when I needed one. A friend? The Duke's jaw clenched. Is that all he was? Evangeline turned to face him fully, seeing the first real emotion she'd witnessed in his eyes since her return. Does it matter to you, Sterling? Do you actually care? The Duke stared at her, and she could see him struggling, fighting against the numbness. Yes, he said finally, the word seeming to surprise him as much as it did her. Yes, I care. I don't want to, but I do. Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes. Then feel it, she whispered. Hold on to that feeling, whatever it is. Don't let it slip away. I'm trying, the Duke said, and for the first time she heard genuine emotion in his voice, frustration, fear, and something that might have been hope. God help me, Evangeline, I'm trying. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They danced again, spoke with dozens of guests, and presented a united front that had society buzzing with speculation. Percival and Charlotte watched from the sidelines, their expressions growing increasingly sour as it became clear that the Duke and Duchess were not the broken couple everyone had expected. As they finally departed Thornfield Manor in the early hours of the morning, Evangeline felt exhausted but triumphant. The Duke sat across from her in the carriage, his head leaned back against the seat, his eyes closed. Thank you, he said quietly, for tonight, for giving me a chance. We're not done yet, Evangeline replied. This is just the beginning. The Duke opened his eyes and looked at her, and she saw something in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a glimmer of the man he used to be, fighting his way back from the abyss. No, he agreed. We're not done, not by a long way. Not. But as the carriage rolled through the dark countryside toward Ashford Hall, neither of them could have known that their public appearance had set forces in motion that would threaten everything. Percival, desperate to secure his inheritance, would stop at nothing to ensure the Duke's demise. And Dr. Reed, unable to forget the woman who had captured his heart, would make a decision that would force Evangeline to confront the most difficult question of all. Where did her duty end and her own desires begin? The battle for the Duke's soul was far from over, and the price of victory might be higher than any of them could imagine. The morning after the Thornfield ball, Evangeline woke to find Ashford Hall transformed. Sunlight streamed through the windows of her chamber, and for the first time since arriving at the estate, the house felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home. She dressed quickly and made her way to the breakfast room, where she found the Duke already seated, reading the morning papers. He looked up as she entered, and she was startled to see colour in his cheeks, a brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. "Good morning," he said, and his voice carried a warmth that made her heart skip. "Good morning," Evangeline replied, taking her seat. "You look better." "I feel better," the Duke admitted, setting down the paper. "Last night, when I saw you with Dr. Reed, when I felt that surge of, I don't even know what to call it, jealousy, possessiveness, it was like a crack appearing in the ice. This morning I woke and I could taste my coffee, actually taste it. I haven't been able to taste anything in months. Evangeline felt a surge of hope, so powerful it nearly took her breath away. That's wonderful, Sterling. It's a beginning, he said carefully. But Evangeline, I need you to understand, I don't know if this will be enough. The curse is still there, still pulling at me. Last night gave me a reprieve, but I can feel it waiting, ready to drag me back down. Then we won't let it, Evangeline said firmly. We'll keep fighting. Together. The word hung in the air between them. Together. It was the first time either of them had truly acknowledged that they might be partners in this battle, rather than reluctant strangers bound by circumstance. Their tentative alliance was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Julian, who burst into the breakfast room with a newspaper clutched in his hand. His face was flushed with anger. "Have you seen this?" he demanded, slapping the paper down on the table. Evangeline picked it up and felt her blood run cold. The society column was dominated by a lengthy piece about the Thornfield ball, and while much of it was complimentary, praising the Duke and Duchess's appearance and their apparent reconciliation, there was a poisonous paragraph near the end. One cannot help but wonder at the Duchess of Ashford's sudden return to her husband's side after her extended sojourn in Bath. Sources close to the family suggest Her Grace formed several close friendships during her time away, including with a certain physician of modest background. While we do not suggest any impropriety, one must question the timing of her return. Does the Duchess seek reconciliation, or does she merely wish to secure her position before the Duke's rumoured ill health claims him entirely? And should the worst occur, one wonders if the grieving widow might find comfort in the arms of her Bath acquaintance. "Percival," the Duke said, his voice tight with anger. Real, genuine anger. This has his fingerprints all over it. He's trying to discredit Evangeline, to make it seem as though she's only here for the inheritance. "It's worse than that," Julian said. "He's planting seeds of doubt about the legitimacy of any heir you might produce. If society believes Evangeline has been unfaithful, any child could be questioned." Evangeline felt sick. "But I haven't. Dr. Reed and I never—" "The truth doesn't matter," the Duke interrupted, rising from his chair. "Percival is creating a narrative that will serve his purposes whether it's true or not." He began to pace, his movements sharp with agitation. "I won't let him destroy your reputation, Evangeline. You've sacrificed enough for me already." "Then what do we do?" Evangeline asked. The Duke stopped pacing and turned to face her, and she saw determination burning in his eyes, another emotion breaking through the curse's hold. "We give them a story they can't ignore. We show them that our marriage is real, that we are united, and that Percival's insinuations are nothing but the desperate machinations of a man who stands to lose everything." "How?" Julian asked. A slow smile spread across the Duke's face, the first genuine smile Evangeline had seen from him. "We host a ball, here, at Ashford Hall, the grandest event the county has seen in a generation. We invite everyone, every lord and lady, every member of Parliament, every influential family in England, and we show them that the Duke and Duchess of Ashford are very much in love." Evangeline's heart hammered in her chest. "Sterling, we can't pretend—" "Who says we'll be pretending?" the Duke interrupted softly. He crossed to her, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm now, alive. "Evangeline, I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's love or gratitude or simply two people clinging to each other in a storm. But I know that when I'm with you, I feel more human than I have in months. That has to count for something." Evangeline looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability there, and hope, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine affection. "It counts for everything," she whispered. The preparations for the ball consumed the next 3 weeks. Ashford Hall was transformed. Rooms that had been closed for years were opened and aired. Furniture was polished until it gleamed, and an army of servants worked from dawn until dusk to restore the estate to its former glory. Evangeline threw herself into the planning with an energy that surprised even her. choosing flowers, approving menus, and overseeing every detail. But it was in the quiet moments, the stolen hours between the chaos of preparation, that something remarkable began to happen. The Duke sought out her company, not out of duty, but out of genuine desire. They walked together in the gardens, discussing everything from politics to poetry. They dined together each evening, and the Duke began to share stories of his childhood, of the father he'd lost, of the fear that had haunted him for years. And Evangeline found herself sharing in return her dreams of a life beyond society's expectations, her love of learning, her frustration with the limitations placed on women of her class. The Duke listened with an attention that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. One evening, as they sat in the library after dinner, the Duke asked the question Evangeline had been dreading. "Tell me about Dr. Reed." Evangeline set down her book, choosing her words carefully. "He was kind to me when I needed kindness. He treated me as an intellectual equal, not as a decorative object or a means to an end. I won't lie to you, Sterling. I was drawn to him. In another life, in different circumstances, I might have loved him," the Duke finished quietly. "Perhaps," Evangeline admitted. "But this is the life I have, and you are my husband. Whatever I felt for Dr. Reed, it doesn't change my commitment to you, to this marriage, to breaking this curse." The Duke was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I have no right to be jealous," he said finally. "I gave you every reason to seek comfort elsewhere. But I am jealous, Evangeline. The thought of you with him, of you smiling at him the way you've begun to smile at me, it makes me want to tear something apart." "Good," Evangeline said, moving to sit beside him. "Feel it. Let it fuel you. Every emotion, even the difficult ones, is a weapon against the curse." The Duke turned to her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You are remarkable," he said softly. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Evangeline agreed with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway." And then, slowly, carefully, the Duke leaned forward and kissed her. It was nothing like the perfunctory kiss at their wedding. This was warm, searching, full of question and promise. Evangeline felt her heart race as she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I felt that," the Duke whispered, wonder in his voice. "Every moment of it, the warmth, the desire, the connection. Evangeline, I felt it all." Tears sprang to Evangeline's eyes. "Then we're winning," she said. "The curse is losing its hold." But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Dr. Elias Reed, arriving unannounced at Ashford Hall. Evangeline received him in the drawing room, acutely aware of the impropriety of meeting with him alone, but unwilling to create a scene by refusing. Dr. Reed looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Forgive me for coming unannounced," he said without preamble, "but I had to see you, to speak with you before—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "Evangeline, I've been offered a position in America. A prestigious hospital in Boston is looking for physicians to help establish a new medical school. It's an extraordinary opportunity, the kind that comes once in a lifetime." "That's wonderful, Elias," Evangeline said, though her heart sank. "You should accept." "I can't," Dr. Reed said, his voice anguished. "Not without knowing. Evangeline, at the Thornfield ball, I saw the way you looked at your husband. I saw something between you that wasn't there before. But I also saw the way he looked at you, and I have to know, are you truly happy, or are you simply doing your duty?" Evangeline took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would determine not just Dr. Reed's future, but her own. "I won't lie to you, Elias. When I was in Bath, I was drawn to you. You made me feel valued and respected in a way I'd never experienced before. But my husband, Sterling, he's fighting a battle that most people couldn't even imagine. And in fighting it, he's become someone I never expected, someone I'm beginning to care for deeply." "Beginning to care for?" Dr. Reed pressed. "Or beginning to love?" "I don't know yet," Evangeline admitted. "But I want the chance to find out. I owe him that. I owe myself that. Dr. Reed closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. Then I have my answer. He opened his eyes and managed a sad smile. I hope he deserves you, Evangeline. I hope he knows what an extraordinary gift he's been given. I think he's beginning to, Evangeline said softly. Dr. Reed bowed formally. Then I wish you every happiness, and I will accept the position in Boston. Perhaps the distance will help me forget what I can never have. As he turned to leave, Evangeline called out, Elias? He paused, looking back. Thank you for everything. You helped me find my strength when I thought I'd lost it. I'll never forget that. Nor will I forget you, Dr. Reed replied. And then he was gone. Evangeline stood alone in the drawing room, tears streaming down her face, not tears of regret, but tears of closure. She had made her choice, and it felt right. She found the Duke in his study, reviewing the final arrangements for the ball. He looked up as she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? You've been crying. Dr. Reed was here, Evangeline said, sitting down across from him. He came to say goodbye. He's leaving for America. The Duke's jaw tightened. Did you? I told him the truth, Evangeline interrupted, that I'm choosing this marriage, choosing you, not out of duty, but because I want to. The Duke stared at her, emotions warring across his face, relief, joy, disbelief. You mean that? I do, Evangeline said firmly. I won't pretend this is easy, or that I'm not still angry about how we began. But Sterling, these past weeks, I've seen who you really are beneath the curse, beneath the fear, and I want to know that man better. I want to fight for him. For us. The Duke came around the desk and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a shifting world. I don't deserve you, he murmured into her hair. But I swear to you, Evangeline, I will spend the rest of my life, however long that may be, trying to be worthy of you. Then start by helping me survive this ball, Evangeline said with a watery laugh. I'm terrified. We'll face it together, the Duke promised, whatever comes. The night of the ball arrived with perfect summer weather. Ashford Hall blazed with light, every window glowing, the gardens illuminated with hundreds of lanterns. Carriages began arriving at sunset, disgorging lords and ladies in their finest attire. The ballroom, a magnificent space that hadn't been used in years, had been restored to breathtaking beauty, with crystal chandeliers, banks of white roses, and an orchestra positioned in the gallery above. Evangeline stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver thread, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. The Duke stood beside her in formal black evening wear, looking more vital and alive than she'd ever seen him. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready," Evangeline confirmed. They descended together and the assembled guests erupted in applause. As they moved through the ballroom, accepting congratulations and greetings, Evangeline was acutely aware of the whispers, the speculative glances, but she held her head high, her hand firmly in her husband's. Percival and Charlotte were there, of course, their expressions sour as they watched the Duke and Duchess command the room. Evangeline caught Charlotte's eye and smiled, not a polite society smile, but a genuine expression of triumph. The Duke led Evangeline onto the floor for the first waltz, and as they moved together, he leaned close and whispered, "I love you." Evangeline's steps faltered. "What? I love you," the Duke repeated, his voice stronger now. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you came back to me despite having every reason not to. Maybe when you stood beside me at Thornfield and refused to let me hide. Maybe just now, seeing you shine like the star you are. But I love you, Evangeline. Truly, completely, impossibly." Tears blurred Evangeline's vision. "Sterling—" "You don't have to say it back," he interrupted gently. "I know I have much to atone for, but I needed you to know. Whatever happens, whatever the curse does, I want you to know that in the end, I felt this. I felt love." Evangeline pulled him closer, her voice fierce. Then you listen to me, Sterling Ashford. You are not going to die. We are going to break this curse, and then we are going to have a long, happy life together. Because I love you too. Against all reason, against all odds, I love you." The Duke's eyes widened, and then he was kissing her, right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of all of society. The music swelled, the guests erupted in delighted applause, and Evangeline felt something shift in the air around them, a loosening, a lightening, as if invisible chains were beginning to break. When they finally pulled apart, the Duke was laughing, a sound of pure joy that Evangeline had never heard from him before. "It's working," he said, wonder in his voice. "I can feel it, Evangeline. The curse is breaking." But their celebration was cut short by a commotion near the entrance. Percival was pushing through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "This is a farce," he shouted. "A performance designed to deceive us all. The Duke is dying, everyone knows it. And when he does, his widow will inherit everything. A widow who spent months in Bath with another man, who returns only when it suits her purposes." The ballroom fell silent, all eyes turning to the unfolding drama. The Duke's hand tightened on Evangeline's, but before he could speak, she stepped forward. "You're right about one thing, Lord Percival," Evangeline said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I did spend months in Bath. I fled there after my husband humiliated me at our wedding, after he abandoned me in front of all of you. I was hurt, angry, and lost. But while I was there, I learned something important. I learned who I am beyond the role society assigned me. I learned my own strength." She turned to look at the Duke, her voice softening. "And when I learned that my husband was truly in danger, I came back. Not for money, not for position, but because I chose to. I chose him, I chose this marriage, and I choose to fight for it every single day." She turned back to Percival, her voice hardening. "So yes, this is a performance, but not the kind you think. This is two people choosing to love each other despite impossible odds. This is a marriage becoming real, becoming true, and if that threatens you, Lord Percival, perhaps you should examine why." The ballroom erupted in applause, and Percival's face turned purple with fury. Charlotte grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit as he sputtered protests. The Duke pulled Evangeline into his arms, holding her close. "My warrior Duchess," he murmured, "my love." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, laughter, and celebration. As the last guests finally departed in the early hours of the morning, Evangeline and the Duke stood together on the terrace, watching the sun rise over the Ashford estate. "How do you feel?" Evangeline asked. The Duke considered the question, then smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Alive," he said simply. "For the first time in years, I feel completely, wonderfully alive." "Then we've done it," Evangeline said. "We've broken the curse." "Not quite," the Duke said, pulling her close. "The curse required true love and willing sacrifice. You've given me your love, but the sacrifice was mine to make," Evangeline interrupted. "I sacrificed the life I thought I wanted for the life I actually need. I sacrificed my pride, my anger, my fear, and in return, I gained something far more valuable, a partner, a love, a future." The Duke kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then let's begin that future," he whispered, "together." But as the sun rose over Ashford Hall, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the garden. Percival, his face twisted with hatred, already plotting his final desperate move. The curse might be breaking, but the battle was not yet won. And in the days to come, Evangeline would discover that sometimes the greatest threats come not from ancient magic, but from the very human evil of jealousy and greed. The question was, would their newfound love be strong enough to survive what was coming? 3 months had passed since the ball at Ashford Hall, and autumn had painted the English countryside in shades of amber and crimson. Evangeline stood at the window of the Duchess's sitting room, watching the morning mist rise from the gardens below. a cup of tea warming her hands. Behind her, she heard the door open and felt strong arms wrap around her waist. "Good morning, my love," the Duke murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Evangeline leaned back against him, marveling at how natural this had become. The easy affection, the comfortable intimacy. "Good morning. You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Sterling admitted. "I kept thinking about the letter from the solicitor. The final documents should arrive today." The letter he referred to concerned Percival. In the weeks following the ball, Percival had grown increasingly desperate and reckless. He had attempted to bribe servants for information about the Duke's health, spread vicious rumors about Evangeline's fidelity, and finally, in an act of stunning stupidity, had tried to forge documents suggesting that Sterling had promised him the estate should he die without an heir. The forgery had been discovered almost immediately, and Percival now faced criminal charges. His wife Charlotte had left him, returning to her family in disgrace. The man who had once stood to inherit a dukedom was now facing potential imprisonment. "I almost feel sorry for him," Evangeline said softly. "Almost." "He made his choices," Sterling replied, though his voice held a note of sadness. "He let greed consume him, just as I almost let the curse consume me. The difference is, I had you to pull me back." Evangeline turned in his arms, studying his face. The transformation over the past months had been remarkable. The gauntness had disappeared, replaced by healthy color and vitality. But more than the physical changes, it was the life in his eyes that took her breath away. The warmth, the humor, the love that shone there whenever he looked at her. "The curse is truly gone, isn't it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Completely," Sterling confirmed. "I consulted with the scholar who helped me research it. He examined me thoroughly and confirmed that there's no trace of the curse's influence remaining. True love broke it, just as the legend said it would." He cupped her face in his hands. "You saved me, Evangeline. In every way, a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Evangeline corrected. "I was as trapped as you were, just in a different kind of cage." Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Pemberton entered, her usually stern face softened by what might have been approval. "Your Graces, Lord Julian has arrived. He says he has news." They found Julian in the morning room, practically vibrating with excitement. He jumped up as they entered, a broad smile on his face. "I've done it," he announced. "I've secured the funding for the hospital." For the past 2 months, Julian had been working tirelessly on a project close to his heart, establishing a charitable hospital in the nearby village, one that would provide medical care to those who couldn't afford private physicians. Sterling had donated generously, but Julian had wanted to ensure the hospital's long-term sustainability by securing additional patrons. "That's wonderful news," Evangeline said warmly. She had grown close to Julian over the past months, coming to see him as the brother she'd never had. "When will construction begin?" "Within the month," Julian replied. "And I have more news. I've convinced Dr. Elias Reed to return from America to serve as the hospital's chief physician." Evangeline felt her heart skip. "Elias is coming back." "He is," Julian confirmed, watching her carefully. "I hope that won't be awkward." Sterling's hand found Evangeline's, his grip reassuring. "Doctor, Reed is a good man and an excellent physician. If he's willing to serve the community, we should be grateful, regardless of any personal history." Evangeline squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. "I agree, and I think it will be good to see him again, to show him that we're truly happy." "You are, aren't you?" Julian asked, his voice suddenly serious. "Truly happy? Both of you?" "Deliriously so," Sterling replied, pulling Evangeline close. "Though I'm still not certain I deserve it." "None of us deserve happiness," Evangeline said. "We simply have to be brave enough to accept it when it comes." The weeks that followed were filled with activity. The hospital construction progressed rapidly, and Evangeline threw herself into organizing a ladies' auxiliary to support the facility. She discovered a talent for leadership and organization that had been suppressed by her previous life's constraints. The women of the county, initially skeptical of the young Duchess, gradually came to respect and admire her dedication. Sterling, meanwhile, had taken his seat in the House of Lords and was making a name for himself as a thoughtful, progressive voice on issues of social reform. The man who had once been too numb to care about anything now burned with passion for justice and equality. One afternoon, as Evangeline was reviewing plans for the hospital's opening ceremony, a servant announced a visitor, Dr. Elias Reed. Evangeline received him in the drawing room, her heart beating faster despite her best efforts to remain calm. Dr. Reed looked much as she remembered, perhaps a bit more weathered, with new lines around his eyes, but still possessing that gentle, intelligent demeanor that had first drawn her to him. "Evangeline," he said, then corrected himself. "Your Grace. Forgive me. Evangeline is fine," she said warmly. "When we're in private, at least. Please sit. Tell me about America." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing easily. Dr. Reed spoke of his work in Boston, of the advances in medical science he'd witnessed, of the vibrant, chaotic energy of the young nation. And Evangeline spoke of the hospital project, of her work with the Ladies' Auxiliary, of the life she was building at Ashford Hall. "You seem different," Dr. Reed observed. "Not just happy, but complete somehow, as if you've found the missing piece of yourself." "I have," Evangeline admitted, "though it wasn't what I expected. I thought I needed to escape my marriage to find myself. Instead, I found myself within it." Dr. Reed was quiet for a moment, then smiled, a genuine smile, though touched with melancholy. "I'm glad, truly. When I left, I wasn't certain. But seeing you now, I know you made the right choice." So did you," Evangeline said gently. "Coming back, dedicating yourself to this work, you're going to help so many people, Elias." "I hope so," he replied. "And perhaps in time we can be friends, real friends, without the weight of what might have been." "I'd like that very much," Evangeline said. The door opened, and Sterling entered. He paused, taking in the scene, then crossed to them with easy confidence. "Dr. Reed," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome back to England. Julian tells me we're fortunate to have secured your services." Dr. Reed stood, shaking the Duke's hand. "Your Grace, thank you for your support of the hospital. It's a remarkable undertaking." "My wife's vision, really," Sterling said, his hand coming to rest on Evangeline's shoulder. "She's the heart of this project. I'm merely the funding." The three of them talked for a while longer, the conversation surprisingly comfortable. When Dr. Reed finally took his leave, promising to call again soon to discuss the hospital's medical needs, Sterling turned to Evangeline with a questioning look. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," Evangeline said, and realized she meant it completely. "Seeing him again, I felt nothing but friendship and respect. Whatever I felt before, it's gone. You're the one I love, Sterling. Only you." Sterling pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I know I shouldn't need the reassurance," he murmured, "but hearing you say it never gets old." "Then I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives," Evangeline promised. The hospital opened in late November, a beautiful stone building with large windows and modern facilities that were the envy of the region. The opening ceremony was attended by half the county, and Evangeline gave a speech that moved many in the audience to tears. She spoke of compassion, of community, of the responsibility that came with privilege. As she stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, she caught Sterling's eye. He was watching her with such pride, such love, that she had to pause to collect herself. This was her life now, not the one she'd been raised for, but the one she'd chosen, and it was more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. Winter settled over Ashford Hall, bringing with it a peaceful domesticity that Evangeline had never experienced before. She and Sterling spent long evenings in the library, reading aloud to each other. discussing philosophy and politics and their dreams for the future. They walked through the snow-covered gardens, rode together across the estate, and slowly, carefully, built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was on Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire in their private sitting room, that Sterling brought up the subject they'd been carefully avoiding. "Evangeline," he said, setting down his book. "We need to talk about heirs." Evangeline felt her cheeks warm. In the months since the curse had broken, they had shared a bed, had been intimate in every way, but she had not yet conceived. She knew it was a source of concern for the estate, for the family legacy. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I haven't—" "Don't apologize," Sterling interrupted firmly. "That's not what I meant. I wanted to tell you that I don't care. If we have children, wonderful. If we don't, that's wonderful too. You are enough, Evangeline. You will always be enough." Tears sprang to Evangeline's eyes. "But the estate, the title, can go to Julian if necessary," Sterling said. "He'd make an excellent duke. But more importantly, I refuse to reduce our marriage to a breeding arrangement. I love you for you, not for what you can provide." Evangeline launched herself into his arms, kissing him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "So very much." "And I love you," Sterling replied, "more than I ever thought possible." As winter gave way to spring, Evangeline discovered she was with child. The news brought joy to Ashford Hall, but it was a quiet, private joy, not the dynastic triumph her parents would have celebrated, but a deeply personal happiness shared between two people who had fought so hard for their love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Evangeline continued her work with the hospital and the ladies' auxiliary, only slowing down in the final months. Dr. Reed attended her with professional care, and the awkwardness that might have existed was smoothed away by time and genuine friendship. On a warm day in early September, nearly a year after the ball that had changed everything, Evangeline gave birth to a healthy daughter. They named her Agatha Charlotte Ashford, after the aunt who had given Evangeline refuge and the strength to find herself. As Sterling held their daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Evangeline felt a completeness she had never known existed. This was her family, not the one she'd been born into, but the one she'd chosen and fought for. "She's perfect," Sterling whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like her mother." "She's ours," Evangeline replied. "That's what makes her perfect." The christening was held at the village church, a simple ceremony attended by close friends and family. Lord Julian stood as godfather, and Aunt Agatha, who had travelled from Bath, stood as godmother. Even Dr. Reed attended, bringing a silver rattle as a gift and offering his sincere congratulations. As they stood in the churchyard afterward, baby Agatha sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, Evangeline looked around at the life she had built. The hospital stood in the distance, a testament to what could be accomplished when privilege was used for good. The village bustled with activity, its people healthier and more prosperous thanks to the reforms Sterling had championed. And beside her stood the man who had once been a stranger, a curse-haunted duke who had seemed incapable of love, now transformed into the devoted husband and father she had never dared to dream of. "What are you thinking?" Sterling asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Evangeline replied. "A year ago, I was the most miserable woman in England, and now—" "And now?" Sterling prompted. "Now I'm the happiest," Evangeline finished. "Not because everything is perfect, but because I chose this. I chose you, I chose us, and I chose to fight for the life I wanted, rather than accept the one I was given." Sterling kissed her forehead, then leaned down to press a gentle kiss to their daughter's head. "You know what the scholar told me after he confirmed the curse was broken? He said that the curse was never really about magic. It was about the inability to connect, to feel, to love. My ancestor was cursed because he saw people as objects to be used. The curse simply made that literal, turning him into an object himself, incapable of human connection. And the cure, Evangeline asked, though she thought she knew the answer, was learning to see another person as fully human, fully worthy of love and sacrifice. It was learning that true strength comes not from isolation and control, but from vulnerability and connection. Sterling's arms tightened around both his wife and daughter. You taught me that, Evangeline. You saved me not with magic, but with the simple, radical act of choosing to love me when I'd given you every reason not to. And you saved me, Evangeline replied, by showing me that I could be more than what I was raised to be, that I could choose my own path, even within the constraints of society. As the sun set over Ashford Hall, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the small family made their way home. The estate that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary, not because it had changed, but because they had. In the years that followed, Evangeline and Sterling would have 2 more children, a son named Julian and another daughter named Beatrice. The hospital would expand, becoming a model for charitable medical care throughout England. Sterling would become known as one of the most progressive voices in Parliament, championing reforms that improved the lives of thousands. But more than any of their public accomplishments, it was the private life they built together that mattered most. It was the quiet mornings over breakfast, the evening walks through the gardens, the laughter of their children echoing through halls that had once been silent and cold. It was the way Sterling still looked at Evangeline as if she were the most remarkable thing he'd ever seen, and the way she still felt her heart skip when he entered a room. Dr. Reed eventually married a young widow from the village, a woman who shared his passion for medicine and social reform. He and Evangeline remained friends, their past a closed chapter that had led them both to where they needed to be. Percival served 2 years in prison for forgery and fraud. Upon his release, he left England for the continent, a broken man who had lost everything to his own greed. Charlotte remarried, choosing more wisely the second time, and occasionally visited Ashford Hall, where she and Evangeline maintained a cordial, if not warm, relationship. And the curse. It became a family story, told to the children on winter evenings, not as a tale of horror, but as a reminder that love, real love, had the power to transform even the darkest situations, that choosing to love, choosing to fight, choosing to believe in the possibility of change was the most powerful magic of all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sterling took Evangeline back to the church where they had married. They stood in the same spot where they had exchanged vows a decade earlier, and Sterling took her hands in his. "I want to renew our vows," he said. "The first time, I was a hollow man going through the motions. This time, I want to mean every word." And so, with only the vicar as witness, they spoke their vows again. But this time, the words were not a binding obligation. They were a celebration of a choice made every day, a commitment renewed with each sunrise. "I, Sterling Maximilian Ashford, take you, Evangeline Charlotte Ashford, to be my wife, my partner, my greatest love. I promise to choose you every day, to fight for us, to never take for granted the extraordinary gift of your love. From this day forward, for better or worse, in joy and in sorrow, I am yours completely and forever. I, Evangeline Charlotte Ashford, take you, Sterling Maximilian Ashford, to be my husband, my partner, my chosen family. I promise to stand beside you, to challenge you, to love you even when it's difficult, from this day forward, for better or worse, in laughter and in tears. I am yours, freely and joyfully." They kissed as the afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting them in colors of ruby and sapphire and gold. And in that moment, Evangeline understood the truth that had taken her so long to learn, that true freedom wasn't about escaping constraints, but about choosing which ones to embrace. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to see the perfection in someone imperfect. that happiness wasn't a destination, but a choice made over and over again, day after day, year after year. She had been raised to be a duchess, groomed to play a role in society's grand theatre. But she had become something far more important. She had become herself. And in doing so, she had found not just love, but the kind of deep, abiding partnership that transformed two people into something greater than the sum of their parts. As they walked out of the church hand in hand, Evangeline looked up at the man beside her, the man who had once been a stranger, then a burden, then a partner, and finally her greatest love, and smiled. "What are you thinking?" Sterling asked, the question he'd asked 1,000 times before. "I'm thinking," Evangeline replied, "that I would choose this life, choose you 1,000 times over. In every lifetime, in every circumstance, I would always choose you." Sterling stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that still, after 10 years, made her heart race. "And I would choose you," he murmured against her lips, "my warrior duchess, my love, my salvation." They walked home together as the sun set over the English countryside, two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, transformation, and the courage to become who they were always meant to be. And they lived, not happily ever after, for life is never that simple, but happily, purposefully, lovingly for all the days they were given, which in the end is the only kind of fairy tale worth having. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Share your thoughts about Evangeline and Sterling's journey. What moment touched you most? I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you in the next story.